Welcome to Rooted and Unwavering, a podcast and radio show which features leaders from all walks of life in conversations about courageous connectedness. How do we stay connected to our best selves, especially when we are challenged? What becomes possible when we truly stay committed to our own and others' greatness, also when we don't feel it? Join host Hylke Faber, transformational coach, facilitator, and award-winning author of Taming Your Crocodiles, and his guests as they explore leadership greatness in today's episode of Rooted and Unwavering.
Welcome to Rooted and Unwavering, where we're helping leaders connect more deeply to their innate potential. I'm your host, Hylke Faber, and I'm here today with Jonathan Stutz. Jonathan, how are you today?
I'm doing really well. Thank you. Thanks for having me on the show.
It's really good to be with you. Before we get to know Jonathan, I am going to introduce a little bit about this podcast as we've been doing in all of these episodes. This is episode 59, and we're doing this podcast because the idea here is that we want to help people connect more deeply to what's most important. And if you're anything like me, our mind tends to go in all kinds of directions, and our attention can be grabbed by so many different things. And then at the end of the day, we can ask ourselves, is this what I want to spend my attention on? And how to take responsibility for where I placed my attention. And for me, when I place my attention on what's most important to me, it comes to connecting deeply to what's true and connecting to each other. And in the context of today's conversation, thinking about how we're all connected, all 8+ billion people on this planet. To me, true wisdom is about connecting between all of us and everything, and seeing the connection between it all, and trying to finding a way, being curious about the way, excited about the way to connect it all. So that's what this podcast is about. So I invite you to listen to this podcast from that frame and think about how listening to Jonathan today, does this help me to get more connected to what's most important to me? So Jonathan comes to us with decades of experience. He's a highly experienced inclusion, diversity, equity, and cross-cultural management consultant and trainer with 25+ years leading teams at Microsoft, Amazon, and Zulily. In 2020, he opened a boutique consulting practice supporting organizations committed to building a culture of belonging to their employees. And in 2024, last year, he published his first book, Daily Practices of Inclusive Leaders, which is published through Barrett Quiller Publishing. Jonathan earned his MA from City University of Seattle in Organization Leadership and a BA in Political Science from the University of Washington. He also serves on the board of trustees for the Bellevue East Side Services, and also serves as a Human Services Commissioner for the cities of Bellevue and Kirkland, Washington. And I've had a few conversations with him, and one of the things that I notice about Jonathan is a person who seems to be very generous and very committed to being of service in this world from a standpoint of fostering true belonging in the world. So Jonathan, welcome. Very glad that you're here with us today.
Thank you for the very generous introduction.
You are very welcome. So Jonathan, first question, tell us about what you've learned about connectedness in your life and leadership.
You know, what I've learned about connectedness is that it really begins with yourself. And learning about yourself and being connected to your own values about who you are. You know, there's an ancient saying that starts, I wanted to change the world, and I found I couldn't do it. It was too big of a task. So I focused on my country, and I thought, I want to change my country and make it a better place. And I found that was too difficult and hard. And so then I focused on my community and my city, and found that was extremely difficult as well. And yet I started to focus then on myself. And I felt like if I could improve myself, then I could change my community, the city I'm in. And then from there, if I can change that, I can change my country. And then from there, I can have an impact on the world. So it really starts with yourself and having a better connection to who you are and what you're about, and understanding your values and behaviors and what drives those and what's important to you.
I love the humility in that, Jonathan, and the clarity of purpose in that. So tell us about how you've learned about connecting to yourself. Maybe tell us a little bit about your life journey, about how you learned to connect, what Jonathan really is about.
Yeah, I've been on this journey, especially since what I call soft retired from corporate life back in October of 20. Opened up the small training consulting practice, and I think over the course of working for big companies like Amazon and Microsoft and Zulily, yeah, I think to a certain extent it sounds a little dramatic, but you kind of sell your soul in that you're reacting constantly to feedback that is indicating how you should behave in these environments in order to be successful. And you're getting positive and negative feedback or formative feedback to improve and grow. And I think to a certain extent, you get a little bit away. And I think over time, you can get away from about who you are and what's important to you and your own values. So this journey has been more recent in discovering a little bit more about who I am. And, there's another study out there, or a philosophy called Musar. And I've been recently learning about it and reading about it. And it's about these traits that we all have, and they're on a continuum. And there are ways to do this self-growth or self-improvement. And I'm just really at the beginning of this journey and learning about these. There are things like generosity, humility, patience, and gratitude. And you kind of go through this deep dive on these topics and understanding where you are and where areas you want to improve on. So, for example, generosity, you can be on a continuum all the way from, stinginess and really, not helping other people, not giving into the community, not supporting folks. And then the other end of the community is giving so much and being so, not just generous, but giving so much of yourself that there's nothing left for you. And so you want to find these middle ground of what's really the right balance. And it's really about balance of yourself and learning about patience. How are you in like when you're driving a car and you're behind the wheel and you get upset about the traffic and not being able to control it. And yet there's the other extreme as well of just, kind of always being so flexible that you never say no. You just always kind of go with the flow and never having that sense of urgency. So this has just been this recent journey in the last year of learning more about myself and my values, and deep diving on that and getting to know back to who I am and away from what other people want me to be.
So let's go back to that for a second, because you said something about, I heard you say something about, I'm soft retired, and working in those big corporations can feel a little bit like I am selling my soul, like I'm selling my soul. So tell us about, because many people are still not retired, right? There are people that are listening to this
Sure.
are in the middle of their career. So tell us a little bit about what was it like for you when you were not yourself, and even what micro steps were you making while still in the corporate world full swing to get closer to Jonathan? How did you do that?
Yeah, I think being in the corporate world, I mean, I'm working for, companies that have high levels of integrity for the most part, and strong values and good managers and leaders who you can emulate and follow. And I've had great mentors and teachers through the years, many of whom I'm still in contact with today, that have helped me. But I think when you see there's certain, kind of key moments that you really start to question whether, what's right here, but yet what you have to do in order to survive. So one example would be performance reviews, leading a team and working in a culture where they're doing forced distribution for ratings, performance ratings on employees. And you have an employee, for example, let's say on a 5-point scale, 5 being the best, they're doing, exceeding expectations, 1 being they really need a lot of improvement and they may be out on their way out the door. You may have an employee that's earned like a 3, right? They're an average performer. Maybe 70% of employees get a 3, let's say, out of the 5. But because of the forced distribution, you're in a situation where the organization needs to hit a certain number to report up to management. And so you're being asked, they'll stack rank all the 3s, and your 3, this particular individual, is at the bottom and it's not hitting the percentage they need to hit. So you need to deliver a 2 to that person. You need to message to them that they're going to get a 2, which is close to underperforming, is really struggling, maybe going, really sending a strong message that they need to improve in a lot of ways. And you have to sell that. You have to go in there and you can't say, I was told to do this, I have to do this. Sorry, it's the forced distribution. You have to go in there and communicate to them that they are a below average performer when they're actually right in the middle mainstream. And that feels disingenuous. It doesn't feel fair. It doesn't feel right. And yet you have to do that, and you have to sell it, and you have to sell it like you're behind it 100%, because you can't blame your manager or your manager's manager. So that's part of where you feel like you're getting away from what's the right thing to do and who you are. And that happens, time and time again in these big corporations that are using forced distribution. I think it started with Jack Welch at GE, who said every year we have to drive out the bottom 10%. And have these forced distributions. So that's it doesn't happen every day, but when that happens, you just feel like, oh, this doesn't feel good at all. This feels pretty yucky.
So in those moments, how do you manage yourself? How do you regulate yourself to get back to center? How do you do it?
It's very difficult, because how do you come to grips with that, right? I think, like anything painful, you are in pain for a while. You're feeling the moral pain, ethical pain. You may lose some sleep. And I think, like anything like that, you talk it through with close friends, with coworkers that you can have those kinds of privileged, confidential communications with. But I don't think it ever goes away. I mean, like I said, I'm talking about it today, and it's been years. It's been 10 years since I worked at Microsoft. So, I think it sticks with you, and you have regret, right, of having to have been that middle manager who's kind of stuck and has to kind of go along with the corporate, drumbeat.
Yes, I hear what you're saying. And the regulation happens, it sounds like, through, well, first of all, being aware that this is painful and staying with that, processing it through, talking to friends, and what I'm hearing from you, trying to find a way to process it even today. You're sitting with it today. Let's talk about.
I was going to say, what you also recognize is you don't know when you're the victim of that, right? Like you're thinking like, well, wow, how many times have I either been, got a, an average rating when I felt like I deserved an above average rating, let's say, that kind of situation. So,
yeah. Right. So it's an interesting setup to find a way to thrive in. So these days, and I think these days means many, many days already, years already, you've been focusing on diversity, inclusion, and equity. So tell us a little bit more about that journey, how you got involved in that, and what makes you tick in going and being in that area.
Yeah, it's a great question. So yeah, you look at me and you go, middle-aged, white guy, living in Seattle. Why am I, passionate and had spent so many years studying and learning about other people's experiences and focused on social equity, social justice. And, it all started at a very young age. I was born in Toronto, Canada, and I moved at a very young age to Atlanta, Georgia during the height of the civil rights movement. And I saw at that very young age, through my early years, discrimination, hate, anti-Semitism, discrimination. I talk about, memories I have of driving to Pop Warner football games in the backseat of my friends' parents' cars and hearing, the N-word and hearing Black people called coons, and myself being called a dirty Jew on the playground and getting into fights for not understanding why I was being, there was hate for me when I didn't do anything, right? I just was who I was. And I'd come home and my family had very different values. We were a very, liberal, progressive, family. We worked on, my brothers worked on political campaigns. I was the youngest of four. My one brother worked on Bobby Kennedy's campaign. Others were always involved in democratic politics, supporting social justice, social equity. And it just became a part of who I am. And being Jewish, there's a philosophy called tikkun olam, which means to repair the world. And it's when you come into this world, you have an obligation, a responsibility to make it a better place before you leave. And that philosophy really resonated with me. And now this idea of learning about yourself and going deeper and understanding who you are. I don't consider myself a religious person, but I feel like there's a lot of value in learning these values that, like I was telling you earlier about Musar, that I wish I'd known about in my 20s and 30s that I never, it's about really connecting with who you are and understanding your values. So that's really driven who I was. And it wasn't until I was, kind of fast forward till I was 35 and I was working for a sales company, of a temporary help company, and my customers were asking me to help them diversify their workforce. And I was asked to, help them do that because a lot of their employees, their full-time employees, were coming from this our temporary help company, and they would convert to full-time after a period of, say, 90 days. And I've talked to my other customers and many others on the east side of Seattle that it was predominantly white in those days. That was the dominant culture. They were struggling as well. Many of them were federal contractors and had an obligation to increase representation of people of color and veterans and such, and women. And so I started working with community-based organizations on the Seattle side and found that they had a plethora of candidates, of people looking for jobs. So I created something called the East Side Diversity Task Force, bringing together HR and recruiters from the Seattle side, or from the East Side, with the Seattle-based inner city folks on a regular basis, and using sales strategies of, you build trust through regular in-person contact. That led to a very successful group that ended up getting almost franchised off with, several others in Portland and the Bay Area and San Francisco. It became a model for others to use. And Microsoft got wind of it. I was in the Diversity Business News with a picture of me and met Jesse Jackson. Long story short, they recruited me into Microsoft as a outreach strategy leader, and helped them do this with the professional technical level folks, starting something called the Professional Technical Diversity Network, working with cross-section of high-tech companies with professional technical organizations like Black MBAs Association, Women in Technology International, Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers, local chapters, and doing that same thing. And that was also super successful, which, kind of led me down this path of finding my passion. That was really a pilot light that started when I was a young kid in Atlanta. I had now an outlet to do this important work, and I became fascinated with it. So that's kind of a little bit of a long story on how I got there, but it's really changed who I am, and it ties into my personal family values as well.
I love that. A pilot light that started in your early life that you then got to find a way to express and do that in the context of the Seattle area, bringing the East Side and the inner city together and then staying with that. Now, this is like the after story, right? So meaning that it worked. So tell us a little bit about maybe some challenges that you faced along the way in building this coalition, because what I'm hearing is you were doing something that was quite innovative and changing in terms of dynamics of that were happening around this area, around the Seattle area.
Right.
So tell us about maybe some challenges you were facing and how you worked with them.
Yeah, I think part of the challenge initially was, who is this guy? What is his motivation? Why is he doing this? I think, I was in a sales role, so it became really the business case for diversity, if you will. I found a business focused. I was helping companies, be more successful by diversifying their workforce. But I think people are always questioning motivations. What was behind it? Obviously, there was a business, motivation, and that those companies that I was helping be successful had a business reason for engaging with me. Customers that maybe, or potential customers that initially maybe weren't open to working with me. They had a relationship with another vendor, another company. They all of a sudden had a business reason to start working with me. And so it helped me build my business. That wasn't so much of a struggle, but it was, I'm sure there were people questioning, and even to this day, I've had folks question, when I'm up delivering training, that I've had, occasionally the comment of, well, we should have a person of color delivering this training, or someone from the LGBTQ plus community. I don't check any of those boxes other than being an aspiring ally to all these groups that have been historically underrepresented, historically marginalized and oppressed. However, I will say that, again, being Jewish, that I never had to really think about my religion or that aspect of me, that dimension of who I am in my work. But now, of course, there's been a huge rise in anti-Semitism that has caused me all of a sudden to help folks understand that, we've been facing discrimination and hate for thousands of years. It just didn't surface in most recent times until like I said, till recently. So, but getting back to your question, the struggles I faced were, I really, I'm a very determined, persistent individual, and I tend to focus on where I can achieve my goals and find people that can get on board. So I spend time with people that are early adopters and try and build a shared goal, shared vision. So I really, I don't focus too much on the resistance or struggles. Even in companies working with the size of Amazon, I had many directors and VPs I was working with that were super supportive of the work and would help me accelerate and do a lot of implement a lot of creative, innovative ideas. The folks that were resistant, I would certainly work on them and hopefully, win them over, if you will, into the purpose and value of what I was doing. But if, it's kind of like when you're digging a hole for a treasure, you dig for so long, and if you don't find a treasure, you go to a new hole, right? And you start digging somewhere new. So where I would face resistance, I would press on, but at a certain point, I would move on. So I think part of it is being resilient and keeping a positive, optimistic attitude that you're doing the right thing, and you don't focus too much on the negative, the resistance you can face. But it's certainly out there, and you just have to spend the time to folks to understand what their real intentions are, and spend time with people who get it.
I get it. I love the idea of looking for a treasure, and then if you don't find something, actually digging somewhere else, and keeping an optimistic attitude. You also, I heard you say something about the change in times, anti-Semitism, and maybe general narrative about diversity, inclusion, and equity. And you having written a book about this that came out, the Daily Practices book last year. So tell us a bit about what is your experience and what is your view in terms of the narrative that you hold about diversity, inclusion, and equity, and how might that be different from the narrative that you're encountering in the world?
Yeah, I mean, first off, the kind of like two separate questions in the respect that the what's really different about our book that I've written with Dr. Eddie Pate is that everybody you understand. There's a lot of great books out there on the strategy about the business case, why it's the right thing to do from a moral, ethical standpoint, but there really wasn't anything out there in the market on what do I do on a daily basis. Like, I get it, this is important, we need to do it, it's a business issue, it's a moral, ethical issue. But what do I do on a daily basis to make a change, to create this culture of belonging where everyone feels seen, heard, valued, and understood? And this is what our book is about. It gives you these daily practices, these small, intentional, easy actions that you can implement. And the book is organized by the employee life cycle. So you can literally use it as a guide to go to a certain aspect of managing your team, of managing your employees, and focus on little things that I can add to what I'm already doing that don't overwhelm your already full plate. So this is what's really different about our book. And the second half of the book is organized in that way. And the first half is really about understanding the kind of foundational concepts of inclusive leadership. That inclusive leadership, first of all, is leadership. It's about having heart, which is empathy and compassion for your people. And that starts with your vulnerability. You know, we can talk more about that because that's really where we get into the connection that I know is, you know, and the disconnection that you can have with managing people, leading teams. But it's also about wisdom, and it's about wisdom from the standpoint of knowledge, you know, built over time with experience that is kind of harnessed into this wisdom. And we do this through the 2IL model, which is the 7 insights of inclusive leadership. And it, you know, a lot of folks in our work will focus heavily, hyper-focus on unconscious bias or implicit bias, as it's called. And we really focus that there's really these 7 insights. And the book takes you through those. And last is about, on the foundational aspect, is about courage, having the courage to act, to speak up, to create a speak up culture. And so this lays the foundation for the book that gets then into the daily practices of the little things you can do to create connection, which is another word for, you know, creating this culture of belonging, because it really starts on a one-to-one basis.
Mm-hmm. I'm very struck by speaking up courageously. So in the current times, a lot of things are going on in the world as always. Even the topic of diversity and inclusion and equity has become more controversial than it was a couple of years ago. So speaking up courageously, how do you practice that in your own life at the moment?
Yeah, and this gets to your second question there, and that was about this false narrative that's out there today. Folks are saying, wow, isn't this a difficult time to have a book on diversity? And I say, actually, it's the opposite. It's the timing was impeccable. And we didn't plan it this way. It just, we did see it. We talk about it in the beginning of the book and a little bit at the end about that there are these attacks on DEI, as it's called. We call it inclusion, diversity, and equity for a very specific reason. And we talk about why we do that in the beginning of the book. But it is a chance for us to reclaim the narrative, to help people understand what this work is really about. As I said, and as you said at the beginning, I've been doing this work, since the mid 90s, and it's never been about, hiring a black man or a black woman or brown person in place of a white man because they're black or they're brown or they're gay or they're disabled, what have you. It has always been about hiring the best person for the job. People, you'll read out there today that we have to get back to merit-based hiring. We don't want to hire on race and gender. We've never hired on race and gender. What we've always done is tried to increase access so that when you are hiring, you're increasing the candidate pool so that you really cast your nets wide to capture a population of folks, candidates that mirror your customers. You want to have a workforce that really mirrors your customers. And that's so their perceptions, their ideas, their beliefs, their lived experiences are represented in your workforce. And so you can best cater to their needs and what they're looking for, how they want to be treated from a customer service standpoint, marketing, all that, and operationally. So this is a chance for us to retake the narrative, reclaim this false narrative out there. And I will say that there's also a little bit of malpractice out there, which has affected us. This industry of diversity work is not something like a lawyer where you have to pass the bar exam, or an accountant where you have to pass a CPA, or even a person in real estate who gets a real estate license. You can read a few books, you can have a personal lived experience, and if you're passionate and you've done a little bit of study and reading, you can jump into this profession. And I think that puts us at risk because there are folks out there who may be misunderstanding what it's about, or they have an agenda. And there's always a certain percentage of bad actors out there. I think it's pretty low, but they can give the industry a bad name because people will think, well, you're hiring somebody because they're Black. Now, at the same time, you can have a team that is homogeneous, and you can say, wow, we really don't have that level of perspective. We're really not mirroring our customers. So you can be very intentional about ensuring that you have strong representation of women or people of color, or any kind of group that's been historically underestimated in the candidate pool. But then you'll always hire the person who's best for the job, who's most qualified, right? And that's where it's really at. You always want to hire on merit, but you do want to create access to the jobs so that you are including folks. And it's not just about having one woman in the candidate pool, right? Because the studies show, in fact, Harvard Business Review published a study that having one woman in the candidate pool, the chances of her getting hired is close to zero. So you always want to have at least a couple people being interviewed in the pool that are from groups that have historically, underestimated, and so that they have a good shot at actually getting hired.
Historically underestimated, a wider access to people of the underestimated populations to mirror your customer groups. I'm very struck by that shift in the narrative, because I also understood diversity, inclusion, and equity also to be like making history right, societal ill, making that right. And yes, that's also happening. And yet what I'm hearing you say is inclusive leadership means actually accessing those historically underrepresented groups, and then making sure that we have a workforce and leadership that represents our customers. We're going to take a short break in a moment. After the break, I'm going to ask you to share a personal lived experience. You mentioned vulnerability as one of the pillars of this work that helps you to stay grounded and inspired to do this work. You've been listening to Rooted and Unwavering. I'm speaking to Jonathan Stutz, a diversity, inclusion, and equity consultant and writer of a book called Daily Practices for Inclusive Leaders. I will be right back after the break.
You are listening to Rooted and Unwavering, presented by Growth Leaders Network, the leadership, team, and culture development company. If you would like to learn more about working on connectedness for yourself, your team, or organization, please contact Growth Leaders Network on LinkedIn. And now, back to the show.
Welcome back to Rooted and Unwavering. We're speaking with Jonathan Stutz. Some of the insights I've had about this topic of diversity, inclusion, and equity so far are, this is not about making history right. This is about helping to make sure we have a workforce that mirrors our customers, and that includes an intentional effort to access people that have historically been underestimated. And a big part of this work is also our personal vulnerability and our lived experience. So Jonathan, tell us a little bit about your own lived experience. You talked about a little bit already about anti-Semitism that you were experiencing yourself as a child. Tell us a bit more about your own experience.
Yeah, I think for me, I can pass in a lot of groups where being white or perceived as white and upper middle class, privileged in a lot of ways, and fully able, thank God. And I'm heterosexual. I'm raised in a family that I had a lot of opportunities to get educated. So I can be in circles where people will look at me and assume that I have the same values that they have. Right? I can be with other people that look like me, and yet maybe they have very different values or perceptions of people that are different from me. Okay. And so they'll say things in environments where I think we might have the same values, but then something will come out of their mouth where I'm like struck that they've said something that just is so counter to my personal values. Right. and so one of them I remember back early in my career where I was speaking with the vice president of operations and the CEO. I remember exactly where we were sitting up by the reception desk. It was a small 35-person company, and small company and in Seattle. And he said something about negotiating with a vendor that he tried to Jew me down. And I don't even think he had any self-awareness that Jew me down is a anti-Semitic statement about Jewish people, right? And it's a trope, right? So I remember just being shocked and thinking, wow, I can't believe somebody's still saying that in this time and age. And this was, quite a few years ago. And yet, I had to, we have a technique now. I have language for how to handle that. And we call it, in the book, we call it the pause button. When somebody says something that might be upsetting to another person, you say, hey, I'm going to hit the pause button so you can actually stop the momentum of the moment and have a more critical thinking discussion, a more introspective, thoughtful discussion about what just went down. And so in that day, I didn't have the language to say, I'm going to hit the pause button, but I remember stopping the conversation and saying, hey, hold on a second, that's really offensive to me. And he was like, this is the intent versus impact. His intent was not to make me feel bad or to even say anything that he perceived as discriminatory, right? And I had to let him know that that was highly offensive to me in the moment so that he would never say it again. And it sent a message to the CEO that we don't talk like that. And so we call that in the book, dropping a pebble, where you can do a little thing that sends a message that creates a ripple, and that ripple creates a wave. And that actually can change the culture over time when it's exponentially distributed, right? To other people start sharing that same message. So we talk about dropping pebbles and the idea of small intentional acts. And that was a small intentional act to deal with that. I remember another one, it was actually the same company where the CEO, we had sales reps that were distributed around the country, and I was the sales manager at the time. And these are moments that I'll never forget, right? This is going back to early in my career. And I had to really fight to hire a Black woman out of Huntington Beach, California. I even remember her name to this day, which I won't say, but I will tell you that when we had sales reps, they were doing a lot of early telesales. And we tracked their work, and we could see the number of calls from the phone bill reports of how often they were working, how many calls they made each day. And they had status reports they sent in describing it. And if you saw a discrepancy between what they reported and what they actually did, you knew that potentially the person was fabricating information. So he and I addressed it with the employee, et cetera. And I actually let her know that hiring her was, she was an only one. She was the only Black woman on the team. And I let her know that this was really important for her to be successful. And I was going to do everything I could for her to be successful, because it was an opportunity to do what I didn't have the language, and again, back in those days, to know that I was working to diversify the workforce. And long story short, the CEO, used the frame shuck and jive to describe how she was working. Basically she was bullshitting or lying. And he used the term shuck and jive. He would not use that same term with a white person, right? So it showed his racist, values, well beneath the surface of what I had seen before. I didn't think those values were consistent with the person I knew, but obviously, they were there. So these are things that were personal, examples that, I saw wrong in the world and felt like I had an obligation to steer my career in a direction where I could really work on these and spend time driving equity, awareness, education. And I realized I really had a passion for it because of these kind of negative experiences, right?
I get it. So when the CEO said that, what did you do?
I think in that moment, I didn't behave as I would wish I had at that moment. I think I let it go, to be really honest and candid with you. I think that I was so shocked. I think sometimes that happens too. You're just so taken aback that, and it's the CEO and he signs your paycheck. And I think I didn't do the right thing. And I regret that at that time, that I wish now I had spoken up to that individual at that moment.
So what do you suggest to people who are in that situation? Because I think that is a very rich situation, right? Where in part of you, you disconnect, or one disconnects from what you really value. And a person in power, in this case, the person, the CEO who pays who signs your paychecks, says something that is not okay for you. How do you recommend people work with that?
Yeah, today I have the tools, and I was very young. I was probably 25 years old at the time, and I didn't have the tools then. But now I understand, and we talk about this in the book, this concept of calling in versus calling out. And calling in is like you can hit that pause button that I talked about a little bit earlier, and then you have a judgment, a choice of whether you want to call the person in or call them out. And calling them in is a softer, more diplomatic way to educate them, to create awareness without throwing them under the bus. And I think that can be appropriate, and you can still send the same message that it's appropriate. I mean, that it was inappropriate, and here's what you should, here's, what I would have preferred, or ask them what they're thinking, or how did they understand, like, how that makes me feel, it hurts, and let them know that this is how it impacted me. And maybe it wasn't their intent, but it's a little bit like stepping on somebody's foot. You didn't intend to step on their foot, but it still hurts. And you still have to take accountability and let them know you're sorry, and let them know you'll do better next time, and you'll try and avoid stepping on their foot. And this is the same situation. It's like, that really hurt when you stepped on my foot, when you said that comment. The calling out is great technique to use when somebody does something, and this is one we're more familiar with, when somebody does something that is so inappropriate, so offensive, that you need to just stop it in the moment and send a message to other people in the room that does not fly here. That is not consistent with our values and consistent in my values about who we are and what we're about. And you need to send a message not only to that person to take it back, to apologize, but also send a message, and this is dropping a pebble, to everybody else in the room, so that when they go into their next meeting and somebody does something offensive or inappropriate, that they have that choice of either calling them in or calling them out, and using that pause button to have the conversation in the moment. Because we're all in this kind of go environment, getting through the agenda, getting onto our next meeting. But there are times when we need to slow down, think more critically, and have those thoughtful conversations to send the message of really what's appropriate behavior, and and how people are impacted by the things that people say.
So calling in, I love that distinction, is something happens and you engage with it and say, tell me more about that, or that has an impact on me. I'd like to discuss this a bit more. And you slow down the conversation. Calling out is, we don't do this around here. Like, it's like a very firm stop sign. No, we're not doing this. Right?
Yeah, and the calling in could be, you and I are in a meeting with several other people, and one of the women is talking, and you interrupt her. You're so excited to get in your point that you jump in and interrupt her, just like I did to you.
I've never done that, Jonathan. I just did it, yes.
And I actually jumped in on you just now. So, and then somebody else, like one of your teammates, like Nicholas, could jump in and say, hey, hold on a second here, Hylke, or Jonathan, Hylke wasn't done speaking, let him finish, and then we'll come back to you. That would be calling in. It's just like, hey, let's let that person finish what they're saying, and then we'll come back to you. And so, Nicholas, using the pause button to say, hey, hold on a second. And women get interrupted, way more than men in meetings, for example. It's just, they get run over by the dominant culture in the room typically. And the same thing is somebody takes credit for somebody else's idea. You come up with an idea, and 5 minutes later, I say the same thing, just a little differently. And all of a sudden the leader in the room gives me all the credit. Somebody should jump in and say, hey, hold on a second. Hylke just said that 5 minutes ago. Let's shine a light on him, and then come back. Maybe you two can work together on expanding on that, but let's give credit where credit's due. That could be a calling in moment.
Very clear. Very clear. So as you think about those moments that you've gone through, and all the experience that you have accumulated over the years, and you said soft retired, right? So neither you or I or anybody else will be here forever. So what do you want to say to people if you didn't have many days left on this planet, right? And I hope you have many, many years left on this planet. But if you didn't have many days left on this planet, given your experiences in this area, what do you want to say to people today in organizations? What do you want to say to them?
I would say to be true to yourself. Spend more time understanding who you are, what's important to you. I went through an exercise recently, and try and really deeply understand what your own values are, and hold true to those. And when you see behavior that's inconsistent with that, try and educate and create awareness for folks to help them along, mentor, to coach, either up the chain or down. Right? I mean, leaders truly want to hear, other ways of thinking about things. They want to hear from folks that can push back on them so that they get smarter. And so I think, just knowing what's important to you. And I've always had leaders that have been supportive of family. I think put family first. I've always tried to, and I think it's really important, but spend time with your family. And if you have kids, or, siblings, build strong relationships with them. It's not always easy. There are definitely times when things are rough and tough, but to try and work through that ultimately, to forgive. I think forgiveness is really important. And I think gratitude, being really grateful for what you have. And I think, it's really important to be thinking about that nothing that we have would happen without other people helping us get there. Nobody does anything on their own. So be grateful for the people around you that help you become the person that you want to be, that support you and love you and care for you, and let them know it. Right. I think that's really important. So
let them know. I let them. I love that. And that sense of, you also mentioned forgiveness. Maybe I was thinking about what you said about speaking up to people in power, right? Meaning empower CEOs or your boss when it's a calling in or calling out moment. How do you practice forgiveness in those moments at the same time while not becoming a pushover? Because that would be something that I would work through. It's like, okay, I'm gonna let this go because of course this person doesn't know what they're saying, and that at the same time there's an importance in calling it out. So how do you work with that?
I think again, you try and drive for change. You try and do these small intentional things to move folks from point A to point B to get them where you want them to be. We call it in the book rocking the boat. You want to rock the boat. You want to drive for change. You want to try and get to this place of where you create this culture of belonging, where you create this culture where everyone feels they're really valued and supported, that they fit in, that they can achieve their own personal goals and aspirations. And you want to rock the boat, and you want to rock it so hard that you don't knock anybody out. But like we talked about a minute ago, there's times when somebody is so toxic and inappropriate that you do need to knock them out. So you have to, forgiveness has a certain level of tolerance, and but you get to a certain point where you don't necessarily want to be around people that are so toxic and harmful to the culture or to you, that in some cases you do want to knock them out of the boat. Sometimes you're in a place where it's so inappropriate, so toxic that you need to knock yourself out of the boat and go work somewhere else or spend time with different people. But ultimately, when you talk about conflict, it can be really emotional and really difficult in the moment. And certainly I've had those experiences, especially, as you go through work that's really meaningful and important to you, and you have something occur which is distracting to that. And you may hurt for quite a while, but then ultimately, hopefully you work through it, you heal, and you try and find the things that you have in common, that you both care about, and you can forgive and move on and let some things go. Like you said, life is short.
Rocking the boat without, life is short. Rocking the boat, sometimes keeping people in it, and sometimes it's time for a person to be knocked out of the boat. how do you make that assessment?
Well, I think, like the situation where, I was giving you the example from back early in my career where somebody said something so inappropriate about Black people that if that was a consistent behavior, you just make a judgment call that this isn't a place I want to be. This isn't a place I want to work. And ultimately, I did leave that organization, not for those specific reasons, but it was a tough environment to work in for sure for early in my career. I learned a lot of positive things to help take me forward, but I also learned about a lot of things what not to do. So I tended to surround myself with leaders, managers. When you're interviewing, they're interviewing you, but you're also interviewing them. And so you're doing a values check on, is this a place where I feel like I'm going to be where my values are consistent with the leader that I'm working for and the organization? And when they're not, you need to make a judgment call over time. And it's like a marriage, right? I mean, you don't, on the first fight or two fights, you don't quit, right? But if the behavior is consistent for 6 months to a year and you're really unhappy, you need to get yourself out of there because it's not a healthy environment for you. And whether it's a marriage or any relationship, right? You want to try and make it be optimistic, try and be positive and do the best you can to turn it around. But at some point you have to make a call that, this isn't healthy for me. I need to move on.
Very clear, very clear. What would you say to somebody who is in the midst of some dissonance, diversity, inclusion, equity, dissonance? They're in the middle of an experience and they feel conflicted, because that's often, I think, a sense where people are, where I sometimes am. Like, I feel conflicted. What way to go? To say, to not to say, to leave, to stay? What would you say to a person that is in that situation?
I think it's really important to have people around you that you can talk to and who have greater experience, greater lived experience. So having mentors, coaches, a sponsor, somebody that you can go to and talk through these situations to help you see through the emotional turmoil that you may be going through and help you think more logically in the moment about what's the right thing to do, what's the right thing to say, how to handle the situation. I think having they talk sometimes about having your own board of directors. I think surrounding yourself with people that can give you good advice, who've been there before, who can guide you. And I think that's really important to have that. I have that in my life. I'm very fortunate to have that. And there's a number of people I can go to in situations where I can just vent, or I can get advice, and they can guide my follow-up behavior. So I think that's really key.
Very clear, very clear. I'm thinking about how to bring this all together, and one thing that you just mentioned was important to me, is like this. Sometimes there's a lot of emotion, and this topic of diversity, inclusion, equity comes often with a lot of emotion, because I think it touches us very, very deeply. It goes right to our core of our values and how we see the world. So maybe in the last few minutes that we have, say a little bit more about how do you recommend and how do you work with these emotions when it's like right out there?
Yeah, and this is a particularly difficult time right now where there is such negativity and polarization politically around folks, and especially when you're talking about the wars that are happening in the world or the attacks on DEI. It's a tough time, and I think I think there's a lot of things I could say here. I think finding peace, trying to get away from it, I think is also important. Like to meditate, to read, to take a break from it all, because it can be all very overwhelming. I think having people you can talk to, and not just friends and family, like I talked about the board of directors, but I think some folks, it's very healthy to get into therapy, behavioral health therapy. I'm on the board for an organization you mentioned at the top, Youth Eastside Services, that focuses on mental health and substance issues that families and kids are dealing with. And I think it's really important to get kids and all of us into environments where we can get professional help and make that mainstream. That is, on the same par with physical health. If you had a pain or something that was bothering you with your body, you wouldn't waste much time to get support for it. So if you're facing mental health challenges, I think it's super important to get the professional help that you need to talk to folks and people that are skilled in giving you that, because there's a lot weighing on folks. It's a crisis of mental health right now with kids especially, but that adults are facing it as well. So I think we should make it more common and accessible and affordable for people to get the health care that they need in order to live vibrant, full lives.
I'm hearing you speak really about acknowledging the support that we do need. I heard you talk about this in the board directors, talking things through. So acknowledging that this stuff is challenging. And it gets the situation just purely is challenging, and then it gets more challenging in the current environment of polarization and what's happening in politics and so on. And so we're not immune to that. I spoke to somebody else who was saying that she is facing a lot of neck pain because she just gets overwhelmed with all this difficult energy around her in her work, in this work that you're speaking about as well. So taking good care of ourselves. Jonathan, we're getting towards the very final minutes of our podcast. If you were to summarize or wanted to say one thing that you want people to really know about diversity, inclusion, and equity in leadership, what is it? What is that thing?
That this is really all about creating high performance, highly effective teams, that inclusive leadership is leadership, and that every human, no matter who you are, no matter what your background, we all have a human need to feel seen, heard, valued, and understood. And that's so basic and fundamental, but that you have folks on your teams that are having a different lived experience than you. If you're from the dominant culture, you need to know that people that come from communities that historically have been marginalized or oppressed, they're facing stereotypes, they're facing bias, they're dealing with microaggressions and micro insults and micro inequities. And to understand that and look out for them, to have their back. You want to create a culture of, I've got your back, you've got my back, where everybody's kind of taking care of each other and everybody gets what they need in order to be successful. And as a leader, that you have a responsibility to take care of your folks, connect with them at a deeply personal level to ensure that they are feeling that they really belong and that they're really supported and valued.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. That sense of intention, very core to this work, that inclusive leadership is leadership. It's about effectiveness. And I would broaden that, my understanding, as team world. Like, for us to be effective as a human species, we need to figure this one out, and we're not quite there yet at all. And so I'm hearing you making a contribution. Some beautiful tools I learned today about calling in and calling out, having the courage to speak up, being willing to drop a pebble, rocking the boat. Sometimes people will be knocked out in the boat, being clear about that. And also being very clear about being supported, needing support, and noticing, I think this is where we started, we're not alone. You never were, you never will be. So draw that support in also when we're working through these challenges of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for your participation. It was a true delight. Anything else you'd like to say by way of closing our conversation today?
Just to say thank you for having me on the show. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to share my message, and I wish you much success and good health. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for sharing your message so clearly and compellingly. I learned a lot today. If you like this conversation, check out Jonathan Stutz and their book from 2024, Daily Practices for Inclusive Leadership. If you liked this podcast, you can keep listening to it anywhere, Apple, Spotify, other places you get your podcast. You've been listening to Rooted and Unwavering, where we help leaders connect more deeply to their innate potential. I'm your host, Hylke Faber. See you next time.
Thank you for joining us in today's episode of Rooted and Unwavering, leadership conversations about courageous connectedness, presented by the leadership development company, Growth Leaders Network. To learn more, subscribe to this podcast, connect with Growth Leaders Network and Hylke Faber on LinkedIn, or read Hylke's award-winning book, Taming Your Crocodiles. Now take a moment and appreciate something that is great about you. Celebrate the gift that you are and enjoy connecting more deeply to your best self today. See you next time on Rooted and Unwavering.